This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
This podcast is sponsored by The Forward. Stay up to date with unlimited access to news, culture, and opinion all through a Jewish lens. And for our listeners, for 2NJB listeners, get 6 months of The Forward for only $10. That's 67% off. An exclusive subscription offer for our listeners, forward.com/2NJB, and get 6 months for $10. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, IsraelNationalNews.com. And last but not least, in collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Communist, Arab lover, tree hugger. These are just a few of the nicknames his rivals use against him. He's one of only a select few Jewish Israelis to have served as a member of Knesset in a majority Arab party. He's a proud communist who, until recently, had pictures of Che Guevara and Vladimir Lenin hanging in his parliamentary office. He's an activist for socio-economic equality and environmental justice. He is Dov Khenin. All the descriptors we just mentioned probably either make your blood boil in rage or simmer with excitement. But either way, this is bound to be an interesting conversation. And if you want to learn more, after you're done with this episode, check out the incredible documentary Comrade Dov, which was recently released, well, not so recently, last year, directed and produced by Barak Heyman, which tells the amazing story of Dov Khenin. We are thrilled to be joined by former member of Knesset Dov Khenin today to talk about his recent resignation from political life, the documentary, his beliefs, and the future of Israel.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
I'm very glad to be with you.
Before we start, so I asked the director, Barak, how, if people want to see the movie, what should they do? So he asks that you email him.
Yeah, so email Barak Heyman at info@heymanfilms.com. That's info, I-N-F-O, at HEYMANNFILMS.com. We'll put also in the description.
Yeah.
So email him
Highly
and you can get a
recommend
link
it.
to the movie. Really great movie, really. We both watched it. It was really, whether or not you agree with the ideologies, there's a lot of food for thought, and there's a lot of really touching and moving stuff in there.
The movie, I think, is great. And for me, what is especially great is the opportunity to meet with people for discussions after the screening of the film. Since we actually, Barak made the film public, we had more than 150 meetings with public all over the country. Some of the meetings, big ones of hundreds of participants, some little ones of tens of participants. But always these meetings have a lot of interest for me, different questions, different issues, different people. And it was for me a thrilling journey to Israeli society with the film.
More than a decade of a journey. That film
is... Yes, the film pictures actually 4 years, mainly 4 years. But for me, this last year, after the film was public, and we had this opportunity of meeting with the people, this is amazing for me.
Before we dive into the movie and your story, I'm sure, we are a day before the historic peace agreement in ceremony between Israel and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And I'm sure as a man who's advocated for peace for so long, you'd like to congratulate, or do you?
Well, of course I'm for peace, and I'm for peace between Israel and every country in the world. But let us be frank with ourselves. The conflict Israel has is not with Bahrain or with the Emirates. We have an issue with the Palestinians. And if we want to change our situation in the Middle East, we have to solve this issue. This is, for me, the main issue and the main focus. Maybe it will help, but maybe, what Netanyahu tries to say through this deal is to try to persuade Israelis that we can, just ignore the Palestinians and continue without them. And that is, I think, a very, very dangerous way.
But are you happy with the agreements? Like, they're not bad, I guess. So,
well, these are agreements with corrupt Arab regimes.
like all Arab regimes.
Most of them, like most of Arab regimes, but the issue of peace is more than a deal with this prince or that dictator. The challenge of peace is to create real change in the relationship between people. And if we ignore the Palestinians, if we ignore the Palestinian issue, then we do not really move forwards towards peace, but we continue to quarrel with our neighbors, and quarreling with our neighbors means actually wars. More wars. They can be small war in Gaza, or medium war in Lebanon, or a big war with Syria. But these are real dangers for Israeli society and Israeli future.
Isn't it trying to put the carriage before the horse to change the relationship between people? Because, I mean, don't you first want to have some kind of just agreement to live side by side, and then the relationships can start building?
Yes, I go along with you. I think that in order to change the relations between people, you have to have a deal between leaders. That is, of course, a first step. But the deal we need is an Israeli-Palestinian deal, and not a deal that ignores the Palestinians and just,
But we've been trying for so long.
Did we? This is a big question, and it's a real debate. Many people in Israel still believe that back in 2000, Barak really offered the Palestinians everything, and they were not willing to accept. But the facts being revealed since then actually shows us that Barak offered the Palestinians something they could not really accept. The deal he offered them was not acceptable for them. In order for a deal to be viable, it have to be, just for the two sides. It have to be, both sides have to win something in this deal.
But since it's already on the table, and we'll move on to the film and to other topics in a second. But what would you see as a viable deal? Like, what would we have to offer them in order for them?
Well, the basis for a real deal between Israelis and Palestinians is two states for the two nations. Now, the Palestinian state should be in the territories occupied by Israel in 1967, including the eastern part of Jerusalem. The eastern part of Jerusalem should be the capital of Palestine. And there is a room for an agreement on exchange of territory. There can be some kind of swap, that Israel can gain some territory and give up another territory to the Palestinians. But the basis should be the 67 Green Line.
But you say two states for two people.
Mm-hmm.
But then the people you ran with to the Knesset, many of them would say, and that's the main issue I think Israelis have with the two-state solution. Many Arab Knesset members say two states, one for the Palestinians, and the second is for everybody, not for two nations.
Well, let us understand what is the meaning of this idea of two states for the two people. The State of Israel was established in 1948 as a fulfillment of the UN resolution back in 1947 that decided that on the end of the British mandate on Palestine, and the creation of two states, independent states, one a Jewish one and second, a Palestinian state. The Palestinian state was not established, and this is the main issue of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians till now. Now, I support this principle. I support the principle of the right of every nation, every people, to have self-determination and to create a state that will be a fulfillment of this right of self-determination. In this sense, I still agree to the idea of a Jewish state and an Arabic state in this land. However, in Israel, what is meant by this expression, Jewish state, is something very, very different. There is a tendency in Israeli polity to translate this very justified idea of self-determination of nation into a very horrible thing of a state whereby the Palestinians, the Palestinian national minority inside Israel, is regarded as second-class citizens. That is something I totally oppose. Therefore, I agree with the idea of self-determination of nations, but I totally dislike and oppose and fight against any kind of national discrimination of the Arab Palestinian minority inside Israel. Israel was created as an expression of the right of Israeli Jews for self-determination. But in Israel, there is a national minority of Arab Palestinians. And exactly as the right of self-determination is recognized by international law, and I totally support it, also the rights of national minority are also recognized by international law, and I totally support
But
them.
the people you ran with, they don't want the second state, the non-Palestinian state, to be a Jewish state. They want it to be...
In what sense? In one sense. Actually, I ran, the party I joined called Hadash, and the Communist Party, was the only party in this country that both is Jewish members and its Arab Palestinians members supported the UN resolution of 1947. They supported and still support the idea of two states for the two nations. Actually, the slogan Israel-Palestine, two states for the two nations, was initiated in Israel as a slogan for the elections by Hadash back in 1981. So Hadash supports the idea of Israel as an expression of the self-determination, right of self-determination of Israeli Jews. Hadash support it, Ayman Odeh support it, and that is the position of Hadash.
Is there a quote of Ayman Odeh saying that he supports a Jewish state as part of the two-state solution?
There is a quote of Ayman Odeh saying that he supports the rights of Israeli Jews to self-determination and the fact that Israel is and should continue to be the expression of this right of Israeli Jews for self-determination.
Okay. But
facts, very, very difficult, but facts are very important.
One of the
Even in this strange world we live in.
Yeah. One of the so first of all, two of the conditions you mentioned is the kind of division of Jerusalem. Half of it would be a capital of Palestine, half of it would be a capital of Israel, and the other one is the withdrawal from the West Bank to the line of 1947, 48. And so those already would probably are very controversial, but there's also, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also the condition of the return of refugees, right? The right of return.
Well, actually, it's more complicated than just right of return. We have to solve the issue of the Palestinian refugees. People ran or were expelled in the war that happened here in 1947 and 1948. But the fact that they ran or were expelled do not really erase all their rights. You have to recognize this fact. This is very, very important. On the other hand, you should also recognize the fact that you cannot, just rewind history. There are people that are living in many, many places from which the Palestinians ran away or were expelled. So you cannot really solve one injustice with the creation of another injustice. Therefore, you have to find wise and flexible solution to this very, very sharp and deep problem, to this very, I would say, deep wound of Palestinian refugees. In principle, Israel should recognize the rights of the Palestinian refugees. How the implementation of these rights should really be created in reality, that is something quite complicated, but again, it is possible. And I would give you one example to convince you that the Palestinians or the Palestinian leadership were willing to accept flexible mechanism on the ways of implementation of the rights of the refugees with the Geneva Accord. Geneva Accord, as you know, found a very, very practical and flexible mechanism, including numbers. How many Palestinians will be allowed inside Israel, of course, with the agreement of Israel. The Geneva Accord was accepted by the Palestinian leadership, by Yasser Arafat. It was rejected by Israeli government.
Okay, so when you say Palestinian refugees, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is the fact that there is, according to the UN, a difference between Palestinian refugees and all other refugees, right? I mean, when you refer to Palestinian refugees, do you refer to how they are defined by the UN, or do you refer to people currently living, who were the actual people who were expelled?
Well, that is very, very interesting and important legal issue, but I think
you're a lawyer after all.
Yes, and I can speak about it for hours, but that is not the most important issue. The most important issue is to solve the conflict. And to solve the conflict, all of us, Israelis and Palestinians, should understand that there is an issue of Palestinian refugees. If you ask me what is the most important factor in dealing with the Palestinian refugees, the most important factor is not the legal one, but the practical one. The fact that there are many, not so many, but hundreds of thousands of Palestinians still living in refugee camps. That is, in practice, that is the most pressing and important issue.
In Lebanon, in Jordan.
In West Bank, in Gaza Strip, people are still living in refugee camps. Now, this is the pressing issue we should deal with. And I think that both sides have to come to this issue with, not with the idea of red lines and saying this or that I will not accept forever, but with practical willingness to solve the issue.
But why should Israel solve this? I mean, in the West.
Why should Israel solve the issue? That is the most important question, I think.
Okay.
And for me, solving this issue is not only a moral question. It is a moral question, but it's not only a moral question. It is practically a matter of self-interest of Israel and Israelis. Let's speak honestly about the situation of Israel. Israel is a small state, small country. Mm-hmm. We live in an area with huge, hundreds of millions of Arabs and Muslims around us. And the choice we have is either to get along, to find way to get along in this neighborhood where we live in, or to continue fighting. Now, getting along is to find a practical, arrangement that both sides can live with, based on the basic interests of the two nations, and that is that both nations should have independence and both nations should have justice. Now, and that is getting along in this neighborhood. Without getting along in this neighborhood, we will continue to fight. Now, Israel is a very strong state. It is small, but strong. To continue to fight, it means another war. War is, of course, something horrible. People get killed. There is a lot of suffering, social and economic and moral damage. But Israel, as a strong state, will win in the war that will happen. But after this war, we will still have the basic dilemma. Can we get along in this neighborhood or not? If we do not find a way to get along in this neighborhood, we will continue to fight, and there will be another war. And again, Israel will win. And after that, there will be another war, and Israel will win a fourth. And another war, and Israel will win, until a war will come where Israel lose. And then we will not be here. Now, for me, this is my country. This is the place I love. This is the place I want to continue to live. This is the place I would like my children and my grandchildren to continue to live in peace. Therefore, the only option in historical dimension is to achieve peace. This is a big challenge for Israeli society. It's not a simple issue.
Yeah.
And you will be very, very correct to say that there are many obstacles, many problems, many issues that should be solved if we want to go along the road of peace. But again, this is the only road that will enable us, Israelis, to live here in peace.
But I asked why we should solve the refugee problem. And I feel like we went quite far from that. I mean, I don't think you think we should try and solve the Yazidi refugee problem or the problem of refugees in other places.
Because Israel is part of creating this problem.
Yeah, but I mean, these Palestinian refugees live in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Gaza.
But how did they arrive there? They arrived there because some of them were expelled from this country by Israel.
Some of them, but most of them are children or the children of these refugees. And
their grandparents parents were expelled. Now,
if they exist there for another 200 years, should we still solve it in 200 years?
Yes, in 2,000 years. Jews came here to this country after, I think, some of them believe that they come back here after 2,000 years, that they weren't here. And they feel very, very much connected with this country,
But no one brought us back here because we were refugees of Israel. We came back, bought land, built a country.
Of course. We came back because many of us were refugees. We were running from Europe in the 20th century. It was a horrible place for Jews.
But what I'm saying is we made our way back.
Yes,
no one drafted a solution to bring us back.
Yes, of course. And
they drafted other solutions
many
for us.
Palestinians who will say exactly like you that the Palestinians should fight, that no one is willing to give them, and no one will give them the right for their homeland. And the only way is to just copy the model of Zionist movement and fight for their country and for their return till they win. There are many Palestinians who will agree with you. But to me, the challenge is to find a different way. Not a way of the Palestinians fighting for their own interest against Israel and Israel fighting against the Palestinians. That is the most simple thing to continue to do. But to find different ways that will bring better future for both Palestinians and Israelis.
Let's talk about the movie a little bit. So there were a few interesting moments in the movie and some contradictions that bothered me.
Contradictions are reality,
Yeah, I guess.
According to Marxist tradition.
Yeah. So the first thing that popped is that basically you say in the movie that communism, a variation of what you say is that communism is a good idea that failed because of bad people or because of failures of people.
Not really. Well,
you say
I
the
think
model failed and it's on us to make it work, okay?
Yes,
so
but
people
the problem,
are responsible for...
The problem was with the model. So it's not just practical mistakes of people, bad people, who happen to be there, like Stalin, He was a horrible person. I agree with that. But the failure of communism is not just related to the fact that Stalin was horrible and paranoid. That is an issue, but that is not the whole issue. That is not the whole problem. For me, the crisis and the failure of communism lies with a very major, deep, theoretical mistake that communists and socialists in the 20th century made, actually. And that is that they did not understand that socialism and communism should be an expansion of democracy, and they cannot exist without democracy. Actually, I understand socialism as the expansion of democracy beyond politics and creating economy and societies that are really democratic.
But people made this failure. They failed to understand that. And because of their failure, people suffered and hundreds and tens of millions of people also died, and not only by Stalin. So my question was, how can you explain putting pictures in the movie? It shows pictures of Che Guevara and of Lenin in your office, and these people are responsible of so many deaths and suffering.
I do not agree with you.
Che Guevara is not responsible for deaths of people.
Well, Che Guevara is a revolutionary. He fought, and people were killed in these struggles, of course. But I think that Che Guevara is a fighter for justice.
But there's evidence that he himself executed people, prisoners.
Also gay people, I think.
There are many debates on that. I refer you to the biography of Che Guevara that was published in Hebrew. Many debates. What happened, really happened, and didn't happen. I do not think that Che Guevara was a saint. That is not the issue. I think it is a manifestation or an example of a person who really fought in very difficult conditions for social justice and social change. Lenin, for me, is an example of the most successful revolutionary of the 20th century. Lenin was very far away from Stalin and Stalinism. You can refer to the testament that Lenin wrote before he died and was actually hidden by Stalin and his associates, whereby he actually warned his comrades from Stalin and from his methods.
But he's still responsible for so many innocent deaths.
Well, every leader in the history of the world is responsible for deaths of people. Benjamin Netanyahu is responsible for deaths of people. Levi Eshkol is responsible
tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions.
No,
of people.
I don't agree with you that Lenin is responsible for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of innocent people. That is not correct. You can read the biographies, not only biographies of the beginning of the 20th century. You can read the recent biographies. For example, let me recommend a biography of Lenin by Tariq Ali, published last year, or the very interesting book published also last year, October, by China Melville on the history of the Russian Revolution. Read this book, or the history, the powerful history of the Russian Revolution in many volumes. This is something you have a lot of time to read this.
Yeah. He didn't murder political rivals.
Professor Kerr, who was a brilliant historian, a British brilliant historian. You can read, all these things.
Lenin didn't murder political rivals?
No, he didn't.
Okay. So he was a saint, basically.
No.
He's not
Again,
responsible for innocent deaths.
No. Again, I do not believe in saints. I am totally secular. Lenin did mistakes. He did mistakes.
Stalin did mistakes too.
No. Stalin was a criminal. He was a paranoidic. He was really responsible for the deaths of millions of innocent people. And that is fact. That is a fact, and I totally oppose not only Stalin, but Stalinism as a system, as a way of thinking. But again, it's very, very easy to post all revolutionaries in one basket and to say, well, all of them wanted social justice. I am a capitalist, so I put all of them in the same basket of horrible people who were just crazy and wanted to tear a lot of blood. Historically, that is not correct. There were revolutionaries who were criminals, like Stalin. There were people who, whose theory and practical methods are so far away from my principles, from my values, that I do not think that I belong to the same family, to the same system. But there are revolutionaries who gave history a lot. You can say that the French Revolution created a lot of suffering, and that is correct. Also, the Russian Revolution created a lot of suffering. Every revolution creates suffering.
And who's responsible for that? Lenin.
No. Revolution is something. Is not a play. Revolution is something very, very complicated. It involves suffering of people. But again, I hope that you will agree with me that the French Revolution was something good. Although the French Revolution, okay.
Not sure.
Okay, there are new conservatives also here in
what
Israel. Okay. I go along with you. There are new conservatives even here in Israel, not only in U.S. Trump America, that oppose the French Revolution, that oppose the American Revolution, that oppose the War of Independence of the United States, whereby many, many innocent people were killed because it was a revolution. That oppose the struggle of the slaves to liberate themselves. This is conservatism. I am not a conservative.
What you put together.
No, but at some point you have to draw a line. And I agree. You're right. Revolution is a basic human right. And the right to rise up against the powers that be and to take them down is a right, is a basic human liberty. It's all up to whether or not you'll be able to. If you leave your house with a gun and you're the only one, then you're probably not going to get very far.
I totally agree with you.
But the question is also at the core of the ideology. So let's talk about about the democratization of the economy.
Yes,
as you put it.
Yes, just before coming to democratization of the economy, let me stress that I totally agree with you. I think that revolution is a right. I think that as in every other right, even this right, which is very, very important, can be manipulated and can be transferred into something very, very negative. And there is a line that should be drawn. I support a revolution, but do I support doing everything for the revolution?
Or
no.
All revolutions. Not all revolutions.
Not all revolutions. That is, again, that is correct. But even a revolution that is meant for bringing more social justice, do I support every mean to achieve this revolution? No,
but that's I do not support. Slippery slope because
I do not.
Mussolini his revolution brought a lot of good things to Italy.
No, that is a right-wing position. You are totally. You totally have the right to engage with your right-wing ideas of opposing revolution, except of Mussolini's revolution, which is something
I would never want to live in fascist Italy, but I state the fact that many Italians feel, and also many Jews in Italy lived very well under Mussolini.
That is a total revisionist. That is a total revisionist vision of history. Fascist Italy from day one, was a totalitarian, repressive regime.
True, but people still lived well under it. in the beginning?
No. People lived very, very difficult in fascist Italy. The struggles of working people, and for me, working people are very, very important. The workers, the peasants, they were harshly, they had a deep depression and oppression by the fascist regime in Italy from day one. And the idea of fascism is not an idea of liberating the working class. It's not the idea of bringing more equality to the society. On the opposite, it is the idea of the stronger or the strongest should have everything, and the weak should actually perish.
And Lenin liberated the working class.
That was his intention, and I think that
you can go to the grocery shop with intentions, as they say in Hebrew.
That is, and here you're right. I think that the intention was good. I think that the revolution in the first phase was really liberating in Soviet Russia in the beginning. It brought some achievements to the working class, to the workers, to the the Soviet Russia did have achievements, a health system, education system,
science.
Culture, science,
above all, I think.
And many, many issues. But the whole system really very fast deteriorated to very, very horrible place, very, very terrible place, with this idea that socialism can be achieved without democracy. I think that was a major theoretical mistake that actually drove the whole system to the abyss.
So how do you, because I've always seen it quite the opposite, that capitalism is able to contain within it socialism, but not the other way around, and that democracy can contain within it, units of communism or socialism, but not the other way around. So how do you see it that, a communist regime contains within it democracy?
Well, let me try to explain to you what I mean with this idea of socialism. We learned a lot in the 20th century. I do not want to copy, the ideas of the beginning of the 20th century in the 21st century. Therefore, actually, when you ask me how I will define myself in the 21st century, the most accurate definition for myself is eco-socialist. But let me take aside for a minute this side of eco and spend more on socialism and what I mean with this word socialism. Well, socialism in practice means the opposite of capitalism. What is capitalism? Capitalism is a system that were developed in the world approximately 200 or 300 years ago, whereby the economic system is based around the idea of profit. Now, this is a very, very powerful system. Very powerful system. It has many, many achievements. It has two major problems. First, it creates inequality. And secondly, with this mechanism of unlimited growth, it creates horrible ecological crisis. These are the two problems of capitalism, inequality and ecological crisis. Now, socialism is the opposite. While capitalism tries to bring every sphere of life into this system of profits, socialism is the trend that tries to liberate spheres of life from this domination of the profit motive. Therefore, when I strive to have public health system or public education system, I strive for a socialist direction, because that is opposite to the capitalist direction of making everything work for profit.
But you say that the two biggest problems with capitalism is ecological damage and inequality.
Or ecological crisis.
Crisis.
Not only
But I would say that, I mean, it seems to me that the biggest problem with socialism is human suffering. I mean, that's worse than inequality. I mean, I would take inequality any day if I could get rid of human suffering. And I think that therein lies the problem. That, I mean, what do I care about how much richer my neighbor is than I am if I have the means to live a healthy, happy life and provide for my family? What do I care if he's 1 billion times richer than me? I can buy food.
You put two issues in this question. Let me stress the first half and later come to the second one. If you speak about the regimes of the 20th century, for me, they were not really socialists. They were not socialist in the deep sense that they were not democratic. If they were not democratic, they were not socialist. So that is the beginning. So for me, and they had many, many other problems. You can speak, and justly so, you can tell me, justly, that in the Soviet Union, for example, ecological damage was horrible. You're right.
Chernobyl was no natural park.
Chernobyl,
the biggest disaster in history of.
It's not the biggest, but it is horrible enough.
Yeah.
And that is an example of something that I reject. The regimes of the 20th century are not an example, are not a good example for me. I try to explain what should be done differently if we want to achieve socialism of the 21st century. It should be very, very different from the ways.
So how so?
From the ways of the 20th century. Now, speaking about human suffering, there is a lot of human suffering in capitalism. You can see the sweatshops in Indonesia or in India and to see how people live. In the capitalist system of the present day, of the situation we live in the world, there are, several tens of billionaires that have more money, more fortune than half of the humanity. This is the numbers of Oxfam last year. But if you look upon the poorer half of humanity, you will see more than 1 billion people living with no proper food, with no clear water. That is horrible.
I don't know about Indonesia.
That is human suffering.
But if you take India, for example, you see in the past, like, it was always a problematic country, right, with huge problems. But if you look at it in the last decades, democracy and capitalism helped, hundreds of millions to rise from poverty to actually being able to provide for their families and from the slums. So many people in India, because of that, and the situation there is so significantly better throughout recent decades because of that system.
I'm not sure that I agree with you that the situation in India is significantly better than before, but I do agree with you that the power of capitalism, and that is something all of us have to acknowledge, is the fact that this system based on profits is something very, very strong. And it does create growth for the products all over the world. And although there is a deepening inequality all around the world, and there are people who are in devastating situation, and when I speak about society like India or other places, it is true that I think that more people in India will be able to buy mobile phones, for example. But the other side of the issue is that traditional structures that existed in such a society that were able to support people in stress or in difficult situation, they were all crushed by this
Take the microphone a
system,
bit to you, please.
by this system of capitalist production, and the result is that while people have more, they are more able to gain some products. The overall system they live in is much less supportive than it used to be. Now, I'm not, someone who really longs for the happy past in India, but you have to understand both sides of this development, of this capitalist development.
So back to your...
I'm no
not sure.
I'm no expert in, again, the Indian economy, but I'm no expert in the American economy either. But I know that in the American economy, the inequality hasn't been on the rise. I mean, I know that the poorest, I think these statistics are from the Congressional Budget Office, that the poorest fifth quintile in America has been getting, first of all, everybody's been getting richer, but the poor have been getting richer faster than the rich, meaning the poorest fifth have gotten like 30 to 35% richer since the 1980s, while the richest quintile has only risen like 17 or 18%. I mean,
no. So let us make an agreement, because we are in a podcast. I do not agree with the numbers you have given, but instead of fighting, I'll give you my numbers and you will give me yours. I'll send you, after we finish, I'll send you a file of graphs on inequality, and you can add them to the podcast, and let's engage our listeners.
Okay.
Perhaps some of them will have another graph. And let's compare the numbers.
Sure.
There's also the Gini coefficient of inequality, but I think there's also issues with there about how you define the level of poverty. But my point was that regardless of the inequality, my question is why it matters. Again, and I wasn't even referring to examples within reality of the failures of socialism or the successes of capitalism. I'm not even referring. I'm talking on a philosophical basis. Why does inequality matter more than simply? And you put it as profits, but I see it as
merits.
I see it as the productivity of human society.
First of all, wealth in Western society is not really connected with merits, and is not really connected with productivity. Most rich people in the United States are rich because their father was rich or their mother was rich.
But in Israel,
that's not true.
You can read the book of Piketty.
I mean, but the richest, Warren Buffett wasn't rich. The Koch brothers weren't rich.
Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. Jeff Bezos.
Most people, you can find examples of different, of course, but most people, if you look at the highest strata in the United States, and you would like to find what is the explanation why they are in the highest strata, the most important issue is their origin. Where they were born and who were their parents. You can read Thomas Piketty book on capital in the 21st century. It's amazing.
But I look at the examples that the top 10 richest people I can think of are not rich because their parents were rich.
There is a very, very interesting about John Rockefeller, I think, David Rockefeller. You know the story that Rockefeller. He started his career as someone who polished shoes in New York. He was very, very successful, and he hired few people to work with him, and then hired more people to work with him in shining shoes of people. And then his uncle died and left him $10 billion. And that is, of course, a joke, but I think that this joke has some grain of truth in it.
But the thing that bothers me about your conversation about inequality is I think it's a perfect example now in Israel with the corona, okay? So you want equality. So equality means that everybody gets the same access, let's say, for healthcare, okay? So, but here in Israel, so this might work in Sweden, okay? But here in Israel, I work my ass off, right? And I pay taxes. Whereas my ultra-Orthodox brother doesn't work. He makes tons of children which he can't even provide for. And he gets the same healthcare system that I get. But I pay for his healthcare system. So to me, I don't want that. I do not care about his healthcare if he is not participating in the game. And that's the whole essence, the whole problem with communism, that some people are reluctant to play the game. So if, and in most societies, unfortunately, some people don't play the game. So as long as not everybody play the game, to me it feels like I'm being a friar, as they say in Israel.
Well, you put a very, very important question. First of all, let me stress that I'm for everyone to play the game. You know, my idea of socialism is that everyone contributes to society in whatever way he can and gets from society according to his contribution. And I think this is
Marx's idea.
This is Marx's idea. That is Marx's idea, and that is my idea on socialism. And if you are, worried about people not participating in the game, I'm also worried. I would like everyone to participate, but I would like everyone to participate in an honest game. That me and John Rockefeller will have the same chance, and you
but
and
assuming
now
it fails.
but let me come to your very, very important example of the corona crisis. Your cousin, your ultra-Orthodox cousin, let's take your way of thinking for a minute and say, well, we will not deal with him, because it doesn't contribute according to your example. What will be the result? The result will be that there will be many, many people in the ultra-Orthodox community, including your neighbors here in this neighborhood, this very neighborhood, who will be ill. Now, the fact that they will be ill will be also your problem, because you cannot be really capsulated in human society. It's not really, the corona is just an example, but rich people cannot really be capsulated from the rest of society. Therefore, if society is not really, basically just for everyone, then of course poor people will suffer a lot, but the problems will reach the rich also.
So continue with this example. I strongly disagree what I think will happen, because I think the ultra-Orthodox are very rational people, and they want to live, first of all, and they want children to live. So I think what would happen in such a world that I depict is that they will realize they have to work and participate in the game, otherwise they'll die. And their children will die. Then they'll be incentivized to work.
Well, I think
and now, sorry, just the last point. And now, with this, what you said about they're turning ill and then I get ill, that's the present situation with the social health. Now they're getting ill because they know it's free and they have nothing to lose. And I get sick and I pay for them and everybody loses.
Well, I think that your model of how society works is, to my mind, a bit naive. You believe that people will behave rationally. And I think, in a way, situation in the world was much better. Although we have differences of opinion, but I think both of us agree that if everyone in the world we could assume that we will behave rationally, things were a lot simpler for all of us. I think that the way people behave is sometimes is connected with rationality or rational, calculation. Sometimes it is very much connected with emotions. Sometimes it's very, very much connected with beliefs. Let me give you one example. I'm very worried. I'm not against ultra-Orthodox in Israel. I think they are a very, very important part of our society.
Your grandfather was.
Both of them were. But when I hear a very, very important leader of the ultra-Orthodox community tells them that there is not real problem of corona and that everyone should, just continue to learn Torah and everything will be okay, I think for me it's very, very worrying. But I do understand that there are people who are taking that as a fact.
Only because they can.
Because they can, but people can.
When there is a sword on their neck, maybe they'll think twice.
Maybe yes,
and they'll
maybe
find
no.
and they'll
maybe
find
no. Yes, maybe yes,
solution
and maybe no.
that involves working and praying in their free time.
Maybe yes, and maybe no. We are speaking to an American audience. Yeah. In the United States of America, there is a president who actually made many Americans suffer a lot because of the corona, because of his irresponsibility. And even that, he was really responsible for a major blunder of the richest country in the world and the most capable country in the world vis-a-vis the corona crisis. There is still a chance that he will be elected to be a president of the United States in few weeks' time.
I think that through the American lens, he didn't make much of a mistake because it's not on him to, it's very un-American what we did here, where we appointed a corona guy.
Corona czar.
This guy, he's the corona guy. Get the corona guy. That's not very American. I mean, in America, it's not the job of Trump to solve corona. Corona's a pandemic. It's Trump's problem if
if law and order
Mexicans are trying to cross the border, or if
that is again a debate, because what you say, it's not an American, it's not responsible. When you have a leader and there is a problem of society, I think that the part of leadership, being a leader, is to try to help society organize to deal with this problem. Now, I do not say that Trump was able to overcome corona. That of course is something not really realistic. But the position of the administration and the decisions of the administration were extremely important in dealing with this crisis, and they were horrible.
But speaking about responsibilities for corona, I mean, we can't ignore that it's the product of a communist regime.
Again, what you say is a communist regime, you refer to one of the most ultra-capitalist countries in the world, which is China. A country whereby workers do not have rights, including rights of having independent trade unions. And if you just ignore the slogans and focus on reality and focus on what I just said that is my determination of what is socialism, then China is not socialist at all.
So if we agree that China's capitalist and the United States is a communist socialist regime, I'm with you. Let's go
both of them.
Socialism all the way.
No. Both of them are capitalist in different ways.
No, but China. Look, it's hard
Prices
to hear.
are fixed. Everything is controlled by the government. I mean, they allow a certain level of capitalism,
but they could disallow it anytime. No, look at the regimes.
That is
everybody's doing it wrong.
That is a question of definition. Capitalism is a system based on profit, and in China and in the United States, it is the same system based on profit. Now, the people who gain in China are different people from the people who gain in the United States. Of course, there are billionaires and multi-billionaires in China. Many of them, actually, not one or two, many of them. But you will be very, very correct to say that the state, as a state, is very much engaged in the system of profit in China and also in the United States. Also in the United States, with all the difference, the state is a very, very important actor in this field of capitalism. You cannot understand capitalism without the state. The idea of having a free market that is, something so far from reality, that is, far-fetched idea of people who are very, very, I would say, not aware of the practicalities of
Naive, maybe is the word.
Naive, yes.
Everybody is naive except for you.
No,
You are the only.
No. I think
Maybe
that
you're
people,
the naive one.
No, I think that people who believe in free market are really naive. They might be very good people, but they are totally naive because there is no free market all over the world, not only in China and the United States. And I think that you are very right in what you just started to pose as a challenge to me, that after the 20th century, we, people who believe in real social change, we have problem. We have a problem because if you will ask me, well, give me one country in the world whereby, this is the paradise you would like to achieve. I do not have such an example. I can give you, examples of things that I would like to have here in Israel. I would love to have in Israel the socialist public education system of Finland. I would love to have in Israel the socialist power of trade unions like in Sweden. I would like to have in Israel a public transportation, strong socialist, I would call it socialist because in my definition this is socialist, strong socialist public transportation like in Switzerland.
But people don't participate. I get it, what you say, and I can see why these things work in Finland and in Switzerland. But in Israel and many other countries, but let's stick with Israel, because so many people do not, and to me, by the way, definition of participating in the game is an household where two members of the household work. To me, that's my definition. Also, we know that in Israel, only 3% of families where two members work are below poverty line. So if both parents work, that's a safe bet that the family will not be poor according to the state definition. So that's my definition. But since so many people here do not participate in the game, and that is not going to change very soon.
Why? That is an issue.
Because
of
why
policy.
should they? Why should they? If they give them everything
issues,
for free,
No.
you gave them for free. What's their incentive to change their ways of life?
No, I think that there are many mechanisms you should understand if you want to deal with this problem you raised of having two members of the household work. For example, let me give you an example of things that I was very much involved in, and that is the issue of Arab women working. Now, that is a challenge. It is very, very important for a challenge for the Arab community in Israel because it is a poor community, and if women were working,
They won't be poor.
they will remain poor, of course. But how can you deal with this issue? Dealing with this issue, for example, involves creating public transportation systems, because if a woman in Al-Fahim is not really able to come to a place where she can walk, she will not go there. And creating public transportation system is the most important factor to involve more Arabic women in
I don't believe it, by
workforce.
the way. I think that someone who wants to work will find a way. Like that's how I was brought up.
No.
And but
Unfortunately.
but maybe we can agree on that. That assuming we will be unsuccessful in changing the ways of lives of, let's say, the ultra-Orthodox, then
Again,
we should be careful about what we give for free.
Ultra-Orthodox, for example, is again partly the blame of the policy of the state. For example, both my grandfathers, as you know, were ultra-Orthodox. Both of them walked. They learned Torah many hours each day, but they walked. Both of them walked. 100 years ago, most of the ultra-Orthodox, not only around the world, but here in this country, in Palestine, in the early days of Israel, they walked. What changed the situation was a policy of Israeli government. For example, dealing with the military conscription. Because if you do not want to enter the army, you have to be part of the systems of the yeshivot. Mm-hmm. And when the minute you get out of this system, you have to go to the army. And therefore, the state, in a way, makes many ultra-Orthodox stay outside the field of war.
I'm so disappointed. I thought we were going to
convince Dov Khenin. Yeah. I think that we could talk. I mean, we're already like 10 minutes over, and I think we could talk for another 3 hours. It really is fascinating to talk to you. But just maybe to conclude, in a sentence or two, what's next for Dov Khenin?
Well, I'm very much engaged in something that we didn't speak a lot in this conversation, and that is the environmental crisis, climate crisis. Currently, I'm in Tel Aviv University. I lead a project that deals with the climate crisis and the change Israel should have in order to deal better with climate crisis. Climate crisis is huge, but it is not far away. This is a present and very sharp danger to all of us. And that is a challenge we have in Israel as elsewhere in the world.
So we've actually been looking for a long time for someone to come on and talk with us about that. So we'll have to have you on again to talk specifically about the climate.
Let's do it.
I think it'll be another heated debate, but it'll be good. It'll be interesting.
Before we go, you're on social media? People can find you?
Yeah.
Where? How?
Facebook.
Twitter?
Twitter also.
Less.
Yes, less Twitter, more Facebook.
TikTok?
Dov Khenin. It's in English, it's Dov Khenin. TikTok, no.
Okay.
Not my age.
Not yet.
TikTok, no. That should be their slogan. TikTok, no.
Okay, before we go, thank you so much for coming, first of all.
Thank you.
And the movie is called Comrade Dov, and we'll put the email of the director.
Comrade Dov, yeah.
If you want to watch the movie, highly recommended. Before we go, we are sponsored by The Forward. Check them out at forward.com for everything Jewish content in America. Check out their Facebook, check out their Instagram.
And go to forward.com/2njb to get an exclusive offer. You get 6 months for $10. That's 67% off. Go check it out, forward.com/2njb.
Also, Arutz 7, israelnationalnews.com. We're also there. Check them out for interesting content in English about Israel and
Australian Jewish News, ajn.timesofisrael.com. Check them out for the Australian angle on Jewish news. You can't say we're an echo chamber. We got The Forward. We got Israel National News. We're on all sides of the political sphere. Okay,
and we accept donations.
Yes.
So 2njb.com/donate. Donate, yeah.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you. And Shana Tova לכולם.
Shana Tova. Good luck.
Bye guys.